Libertarian student news publication here at the University of Chicago. I thank you all for being here. My name is Kellen Ryle, and I have had the privilege of serving as the editor-in-chief of The Thinker this year. As a fifth-year PhD student, studying computational biology and genetics, I am in some ways a fairly atypical participant in this world of political, economic, and cultural matters. However, I believe this is why my time with The Thinker has been so meaningful. It's given me the chance to work with a remarkable community of like-minded students who discuss ideas seriously, constantly debate ideas and events amongst themselves, and believe that open dialogue like that here at the summit are critical to shaping American society. It is not a small thing to bring together public officials, scholars, industry leaders, students, and members of a broader community for 2 whole days of discussion. I would like to thank everyone who helped make this event possible, including the Thinker members who put a tremendous amount of work into organizing this event, and the many moving parts involved, the speakers who are generously giving their time to be here, and all of you in the audience for choosing to spend a portion of your weekend here with us. We would also like to thank the many institutional partners whose generous donations have helped make this year's summit a reality, including DRW Holdings, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute's Collegiate Network, the Acton Institute, Responsible Statecraft, the Becker-Friedman Institute, and the Chicago Forum's Zell Speaker and Event Series and Zell Family Foundation. The theme of our yearly summit is the American identity, but that concept is not one that's easy to define. While the American identity is shaped by the obvious symbols of national life, like our flag, founding documents, monuments, and unique cultural traditions, it is also greatly shaped by far less tangible forces, like global power, national institutions, cultural responsibility, innovation, and the way that each generation chooses to carry forward what it inherited from the last. That is especially true as the United States approaches the 250th anniversary of its founding. While certainly a time for celebration, it should also invite examination and reflection. Do we understand the principles we claim to have built and honor? Are our current institutions actually capable of practicing and sustaining those principles? How have we adapted in the face of the many challenges over the centuries? How have we been able to maintain the elements that made us exceptional in the first place throughout this evolution? These questions matter not only because of what America has been, but because of what future generations will inherit from us. Whether one looks at the present state of the country with enthusiasm, concern, or some combination of both, we have a responsibility to ask what kind of country we are passing on. The critical choices made today in sectors like politics, technology, education, economics, and foreign policy will shape not only America's immediate future, but the way this era becomes understood by historians centuries from now. Tonight's panels begin by asking what it will take for the US to remain safe, powerful, influential, and creative in an age of great uncertainty both here and abroad. Our first panel concerns America's role in the world and questions of foreign policy, global order, national security, and the limits of American power in an ever-increasingly complex and contentious global environment. The answers to them will shape war and peace, alliances and deterrence, trade and technology, and cultural exchange and development. For much of the modern era, Americans have grown accustomed to a world in which the US was indisputably dominant. However, in what many now consider an increasingly unipolar world, decisions about what the US should, can, and promise to do going forward have become far less straightforward. Our second panel focuses on technology, innovation, and artificial intelligence, topics that are all deeply entwined with America's role in this world. In this era of unprecedented, rapid technological advancement, artificial intelligence is not just another industry, but something that's becoming a core component of national competitiveness itself. America's strength as a nation in the 21st century will not only be measured by the military power or diplomatic influence it holds, but also now by the technological competence, institutional adaptability, and the ability to build the new and necessary infrastructure quickly and strategically. Tomorrow, we will also be hosting panels on America's evolution, how it's past, present, and future, and we will also be holding a second panel thereafter on the increasing complexities of the markets here in America in the 21st century. America's challenges are not simple. Many of these questions do not have easy answers. However, through honest, serious, disciplined discussion and debate, and an extreme willingness to engage with those you may disagree with, we will always be able to come to a more optimal conclusion on the best path forward. That is the tone we hope to set tonight and tomorrow throughout the summit, and a behavior I believe strongly that the University of Chicago is dedicated to instilling in its students. My hope is that everyone here approaches these conversations not only as attendees, but as participants. Listen carefully, engage critically with the arguments presented, and during the Q&A portions, please ask tough, thoughtful, and constructive questions. America's next 250 years will, on paper, be shaped by elections and institutions, But under the hood, discussions like these help shape the outcomes of those elections and character of those institutions. I thank you again for joining us and ask that you all please silence your cell phones. I will now pass the stage to Christopher Phillips, the editor-in-chief of the Chicago Thinker last year, who, having graduated now, presides as the president of the Chicago Thinker Foundation, the publication's operating organization.
Good job, man. Good stuff. Alrighty. Awesome. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Christopher Phillips, as you heard from Kellen, who, by the way, has done an amazing job as the editor-in-chief this year. In fact, all the students, I've just been completely blown away by the amount of effort that they've put in to the paper, to publishing articles, and to organizing this event. Last year was the first edition of the American Identity Summit. This is our second, hopefully annual edition, and so it's just been very inspiring to see the work that they have put in because they care about it, because they believe in it. Which has really been the mantra of the Thinker from the very beginning. As you heard from Kellen, I was the editor-in-chief last year of the publication, and now I've gone on, and I am now the president of the Chicago Thinker Foundation, which is the nonprofit dedicated to managing the brand and assets of the student publication. We were founded in October of 2020 in the midst of COVID insanity and leftist cultural fervor that really chilled free expression. More broadly, but especially on college campuses, which are supposed to be bastions of free inquiry, as we know. Our publication has had many truly profound journalistic accomplishments over the years, including successfully pushing back on authoritarian COVID-era mandates, defeating mainstream censorship enthusiasts in this very building, as a matter of fact, and reporting on and organizing against destructive takeovers of campus here and there, and in the meantime, reporting on campus culture and events. Last year, as I mentioned, the Thinker organized the inaugural American Identity Summit at the University of Chicago, and this is our second go-around. Now, what is this summit about? Of course, we're analyzing the fundamental tenets of the American identity. What are those central values upon which this nation was founded and has succeeded? How are those values changing over time? And then what are the effects of those changes going to be on the country moving forward? To determine the answers to these questions, we're going to have to critically engage many of the underlying assumptions that our leaders and especially our thought leaders have held for decades, as a matter of fact. 30 years ago, the direction of our country seemed a lot more predictable than it is right now, and we can talk about whose fault that is or if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Of course, that's going to be a major subject of our discussion today and tomorrow. But in an era where legacy neoliberal institutions are waning in influence, relatively speaking, what will be the institutions that create the elites and, more importantly, the decision makers of the future? Where will those people come from? That's a very important question. It's hard to say for sure, but my view and the view of many of us is that they will come together through organizations that are less state-sanctioned, if you will, that are more grassroots in nature and more meritocratic, which is, I think, probably a good thing. People who are curious about where the world will go will self-select into these organizations, and they'll connect with one another and make decisions and collaborate on initiatives that will take us into the future. Now, our vision for the annual summit and for the Chicago Thinker more broadly is to turn it into a nexus that's a part of a broader connective network to bring these people together in order to effectuate thoughtful, positive change. So without further ado, I want to move into the first panel. It's going to be a great program we have today. Our first panel is on foreign policy and the budding Donroe Doctrine. The panel after that is going to be on AI, which is inextricably linked, of course, to geopolitical tensions and vice versa. I want to tell you that if you're inspired by what you see tonight or tomorrow, by the way, we start at 10 a.m. tomorrow, I encourage you to be there because that's also really, really great programming. If you're inspired by this at all and you want to learn more about what the Chicago Thinker does, what it means to be a member of the organization and to participate in the mission that I just described, I encourage you to talk to me or to one of the student members at some point this evening or tomorrow. I also want to mention that we've got a gala tomorrow after the programming access to that is not conferred with the student tickets, but we have special student tickets available on the Eventbrite. There are a few left. So if you want to get more involved with the programming this weekend, I suggest you do that. Anyway, without further ado, I will step aside, and I'm glad you're here, and we're very excited for the programming for this weekend. So thank you very much, and enjoy the summit.
Harold Brown Chair, and Director of the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. He previously served as the Director of the International Security and Defense Policy Center at the RAND Corporation and as an advisor to the U.S. Special Forces operations in Afghanistan. Justin Logan is the Director of Defense and Foreign Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. He is an expert on U.S. grand strategy, international relations theory, and American foreign policy. His current research focuses on three subjects: the failure of U.S. efforts at burden sharing in NATO, the shifting balance of power in Asia, and the limited relevance of the Middle East to U.S. national security. Leslie Vinjamuri is the president and CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. She previously served as the director of the U.S. and the Americas program at Chatham House in London and has held fellowships at Harvard University and the London School of Economics. And finally, Robert Pape is a professor of political science at the University of Chicago and the director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats. His books include Dying to Win, The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism, and Bombing to Win, Air Power and Coercion in War. This panel will be moderated by Eduardo Ribeiro, the Chief Financial Officer of the Chicago Thinker, who is a second year studying business economics and political science in the college. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Angron, for a beautiful introduction. So I'm Eduardo. I'm a second year in the college. And for this panel, I want to get right straight to it. Let's talk about Iran, right? We have a lot to talk about over the last year in foreign policy. You have Venezuela, you have Europe, you have everything. But start with Iran. It's been in the headlines for the last month. So I wanted to ask, Professor Pape, recently you've argued on social media, and I'm taking your class, so you've argued thousands of times in class, that the war in Iran, which we're engaged right now, it's a major blunder. It's going to backfire for the next few years for America. And you've also argued that it's going to be Iran is turning into a fourth center of world power. So can you explain what you mean by that, and we'll start off with it.
Thanks very much, Eduardo. It's a real honor to be here. One of the big reasons here is because I know all of these people very well. I've known Leslie since when she was in England, but I've known these two here from the University of Chicago. And this is really an event for young people. Well, someday this will be you. And so you should just count on that. These are now very important people, and it's really just an honor to be here.
I thought you were going to say old.
No, important.
Set higher goals.
So I'm going to talk for maybe 5 minutes. I want to put this in the context, the Iran war, of a value. And that value is primacy. I don't think we know much what that's about, what the taproot is, but that's an important value. I like the United States being the most powerful and richest country in the world. Now, I'll say more about what that taproot is in a minute, but what that taproot is not is forever wars. Forever wars, and you're familiar with Iraq, Afghanistan. Well, most of the young people think about this as 20 years. They weren't really there. I'm going to use another word for forever wars: waste. Waste. And that's not just 6,600 dead Americans, more than double who died on 9/11, but the $5 trillion plus we spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. Imagine if you had taken even half of that $5 trillion and invested it in the Rust Belt in America. Think about that. I'm talking about Western Pennsylvania through Kentucky all the way through Detroit. Think about the world we would be in. That's what I mean by waste. Now, Iran is on the verge of becoming the next forever war. And by the way, we had a forever war before those two. It was called Vietnam. So we're now almost on our fourth forever war. And it's not like we have them every 10 years, but we've been having a lot of forever wars. And I have called this an escalation trap in Iran. That's my phrase. It's because just like in Vietnam, just like in the two forever wars, there were some good reasons to go in. It wasn't there was zero good reasons to go in. It's that every time we had a tactical success, that often led to a strategic failure where we doubled down and had escalation. Not always the same detailed form of escalation, but that's how they became forever wars. Now, so what do we need to do to get out of perennial forever wars? I believe we need to understand what primacy really is. Now, in my business, a lot of people tell you primacy is, well, you got to figure out which part of the world is the most important, and then you got to figure out what means is most important, and it's an army. Well, I got to tell you that in World War II, if army size was the key to American primacy, we would never have demobilized in World War II. We would never have demobilized. And you know who did not demobilize? The Soviet Union. And look what happened to the Soviet Union. I believe primacy has not been well understood, and the taproot of American primacy is economic modernization. What has made us the richest, most powerful country since 1880? We have been the leaders in the electric revolution, the aluminum revolution, the aerospace revolution, the computer, and then the microelectronics revolution, and now the iPhone revolution. This is not destined. I don't think we have genes that are destined to make this true, but this is what's put at risk. And if we don't make that our number one goal, economic modernization, we're missing what is primacy. So we can say we want to have all these discussions of grand strategy, but we really need to understand what is job one. Now, okay, so if that's job one, how would that apply to the Middle East? Well, there is a strategy I like called offshore balancing, which means American military as the force of last resort. That is, don't fight other people's wars for them, but that's what we keep doing over and over and over again. So what would it mean to switch? What that would mean right now, today, you know, we have an economic blockade. We could start to switch. Who's hurt the most by that blockade? Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Are they have enough power to march on Tehran? No, they don't. Do they have enough power to use drones to shut down and do most of, maybe not all that we do in the naval blockade, but let's say 70% of what we do in the naval blockade? They sure do, certainly over a few months. So I think what we need to do is we need to recognize that we need a real offshore balancing plan here. We need to really develop it. And number one, that means shifting the burden to our ground allies, our regional allies, where they can do it. Number two, Netanyahu just laid out a key plan for getting us out of the demand pulls. There's two demand pulls pulling us in the Middle East, and we all know it. One is Israel. The other is oil and energy. So what would you do with Israel? Netanyahu on 60 Minutes said, 10-year plan, cut us off. He said, start now. I would start 10% a year, just take the plan. He's given the roadmap, put teeth in it though. 10% a year, every year for 10 years, you get to zero. This is what we should do. The third thing is, what are we going to do about energy? There's a roadmap. It's called China. It's called solar. Okay, they're not doing it because they're Democratic Party people. This is not liberal progressives. They're doing it because it's primacy. We should be doing that. And I would adopt all this starting now. This may be hard for the Trump administration to swallow, but you folks are going to be here long after the Trump administration is gone. The president might not want to hear that, okay, but you're going to be here, and we've got to figure out, and you've got to figure out, what is an actual grand strategy for primacy? And I hope I helped. Thank you.
Perfect. So, here we go. So I wanted to pick up on something you said, and Leslie, if we can start with you, and if anyone wants to jump in. So you mentioned the major strategy, one of the major strategies the U.S. should be doing is using its proxies in the Middle East. You pointed out at the UAE and in other countries that were affected by the embargo as options for that. How does the U.S. system of alliance has changed with that? Because we didn't see NATO countries helping us with the war. They, in fact, declined to do so. Do you think we could drag more countries in the Middle East into this war? And what does that mean for Americans' allies?
Yeah, big questions. I mean, I guess a couple of things. I mean, first of all, I don't disagree with the overall framing that, and one would never disagree with Professor Pape because he's so famous. But I don't disagree with the kind of tenets underneath the overall frame, that energy security is critical, that the United States, when it uses military force, should do so with a clear objective that is winnable given the resources that it has and the threat that it faces, rather than getting itself into wars in which it changes its objectives and ends up on the ground forever. And that there should be more reliance on ground allies for threats that are not primary to the United States. But I do actually take objection to the framing. And I think it's because I don't understand fundamentally why it's necessary to say, maybe it's because I lived outside the United States for 20 years. I'm married a Brit and have kids with 2 passports and all the rest of it. But, I don't understand why it's necessary for the United States to say, we must be number one. Why? Which isn't to say that, of course, the United States absolutely must invest in its infrastructure, in its education, in the people, including the dual nationals who live within our borders. Geography matters, that the economy must be strong, that we must be competitive. And one of the phenomenal sources of our competitiveness is that we're not actually nationalists. We're actually, within our home country, within our territory, we've been globalists at home. We've invited people in, and we've been wise enough to take advantage of their intelligence, their phenomenal drive and ambition, which often puts native-born U.S. white Americans to shame. And we've maybe held back a little bit on the us versus them. I think the us versus them, which is in a sense what the primacy framing does not actually strengthen the value, the purpose, the economy, the strength, the resilience, the likability, which translates into material impacts of the United States, either within or beyond its borders. The second point, it's a little bit, it's a little bit playing fast and loose with the facts to blame America's European allies for not helping this is not a response to you, it's a response to you.
I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying they didn't come in.
Well, they didn't come in. They weren't invited. They weren't told. They weren't informed. They weren't brought along. You want to bring your marital partner along, your students along, your boss along. You got to build, you got to make the argument, you got to build the coalition, you've got to show them why it's worth being your friend. And the United States has benefited massively from having allies, treaty allies, and also non-treaty allies, partners that China would give its right arm to destroy, undermine, or have, although that's not really been its strategy. So I don't think it's about, why aren't they there? Well, I mean, there are a lot of complicated reasons why they're not there, and it's still not really clear what the plan is. So, for countries that are small, struggling economically at home, have limited capabilities, and don't fundamentally trust the current U.S. leader, they're making a calculation that is, partly strategically or designed, and partly designed to respond to the fact that it's in the UK, 68% of Brits think that America is either primarily or largely doing bad for the world, bad things for the world. I mean, if that's your domestic political constraint, your decisions, if you frame it that way, your decisions look very differently. So, yes, of course, the U.S. needs to invest at home in order to be competitive abroad, but also the United States needs allies, needs partners, needs a strategy for the global South. And I don't think that it gets us very far to talk about how we need to be number one, we need to be primary, and we need to come first. It just it unnecessarily alienates the people on whose goodwill we need to depend.
Seth, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I want to come in on this. By the way, my most formative educational years were on this campus. So I got my master's and PhD here, worked with Bob. You weren't on my committee, though, so you got here too late. But
I got to be impressed by it.
I loved my time here and loved being back, really loved being back. I always get energized by the intellectual energy here. I come at this from this sort of question from the U.S. Perspective. As the U.S. looks around the globe, as U.S. leaders look around the globe, what are the big threats that the U.S. needs to consider, both military and economic? From my perspective, when you look at the growing power, particularly of China economically, when you look at the growing military power of the Chinese, I was at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa a couple of months ago, and we were going on a anti-submarine warfare mission flying out of a Navy P-8. There was a carrier strike group coming through the area and into the South China Sea, and in order to protect a carrier strike group, you obviously have not just the destroyers and the surface vessels and the submarines, U.S. submarines that are protecting it, but you also need aircraft to fly well ahead of where that aircraft carrier is going to go to drop sonobuoys to check for Chinese submarines lurking below the surface, which you can't see necessarily with satellite imagery. And it was a 2-hour trip from Kadena Air Force Base to the South China Sea, where we had our operations box to drop sonobuoys to look for the Chinese sub, which we found. And what was striking is I sat up in the seat with the two pilots, and I've got the intelligence picture, and a P-8 up at the front's got an intelligence picture. And what was stunning was, because I read a lot of stuff, but what was stunning was actually to see the real-time picture of People's Liberation Army aircraft that were flying and surface vessels. This was not one of the joint sword exercises, though they've been doing a lot of those. This was just sort of routine operations. It looked like New York City or Chicago at rush hour, and just the sheer number of vessels. What the Chinese are doing when it comes to the use of military civil fusion to build 5th generation and now 6th generation strike aircraft, bombers that are highly capable, more missiles now than the United States on a yearly basis, including long-range strike. They're on pace for 1,000 nuclear warheads by the end of the decade, and 1,500 by the early 2030s. Ground systems, their shipbuilding capacity is over 230 times the size of the U.S.'s both commercial and military shipbuilding capacity. Let me say that one more time. 230 times the size of U.S. shipbuilding capacity. One of China's shipyards is larger than all U.S. shipyards combined.
What's even scary about it, that it's every commercial ship in China has to be fitted with military standards, which means that every carrier, every passenger carrier can be turned into a military carrier, or like something to carry on tanks. So if you go into war, that's absolutely true. They have 230 more. Capacity to build,
from my perspective, this is the country to be focused on. Mm-hmm. So the concern I have with Iran is we continue to focus foreign policy energy and I'll come back to it later, I won't bore the details now, expend massive numbers of munitions that have depleted our entire stockpile below the war plans we have for any of our combatant commands are called operational plans or O plans. We're below the level requirement for our China O plan right now for both some defensive and offensive munitions. My question is, was that the strategic calculation that we wanted to take? Does that make sense? We've got a major competitor in the Chinese, and we have just expended vast resources in the Iranian threat is not insignificant, but my general view is the Israelis are actually able to take care of most of that, as we saw getting air dominance in 2 days of that war, which is actually striking because it's worth noting the Russians in year 5 still don't have air dominance over Ukraine. So my big issue is if you're prioritizing your national security strategy and your defense strategy, this is not how you do it.
Justin, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would just say everything is exactly as it seems. Your crazy boomer uncle is just pushing buttons and doing things. The Congress is an irrelevancy. The sort of foreign policy commentariat is an irrelevancy. And I think, I want to very much associate myself with Dr. Jones's remarks about, if you wanted to prioritize, this wasn't how you would do it. We're absolutely not prioritizing. We're moving air defenses out of the Indo-Pacific into the Middle East. And I'll just say, as a sort of global statement, I wrote a paper a long time ago that had this wisecrack that I'll share with you. I'm sorry. The Middle East is a small, poor, weak region whose problems we cannot fix. And the best thing we could do would be to leave it alone. But we seem to be incapable of doing that for reasons that are entirely inscrutable to me as somebody who's been around this business for the better part of 20 years. The president did not make a case in Washington, D.C. for why there was a proximate threat posed by Iran. They were bragging last June about having, quote, totally obliterated the Iranian nuclear program. After launching this latest war, the president announced that they were 2 weeks from a nuclear weapon. There's a technical IR term for this. It's called lying. He's lying about how close the Iranians were to a nuclear weapon. And I think we in this sort of foreign policy commentariat, if we do think, and I'm a fairly dovish guy generally, but I do think that big, powerful, wealthy states, if you're going to have a military or what your military should be pointed at, we should have our hair on fire about the extent to which the ingredients for conducting the American way of war are being drawn down by insane, idiotic, counterproductive conflicts in the Middle East. After the 12-day war in June, the Pentagon leaked to the Guardian newspaper that we had 25% of the interceptors needed to sort of instantiate existing defense plans globally, right? The American way of war involves insulating ourselves to a very high degree from retaliation from the adversaries and insulating our partners and regional allies from retaliation for the adversaries. There is going to be more news coming out in the coming days and hours about the extent to which we have drawn down munitions that are essential for conducting any American military operation against any country larger and more powerful than Venezuela. So I think this is we've crossed a Rubicon here where these supplies are not replenishable in short order. We're just doing something that's insanely counterproductive. And I would just say as sort of two coda to 2 points that were made previously, I very much agree with Professor Pape's remarks about economic innovation and our wealth being the sort of taproot of our strength. But that economic growth, that wealth, is a taproot of our uniquely wonderful geography, right? If you look at what the founding fathers said about the United States of America, the last thing they wanted to do was to get swept up in the intrigue and power politics of continental Europe. And now we seem to be swept up in the intrigue and power politics of literally every region on the face of planet Earth. This is anathema to the principles that founded this country. And just as one coda to my other coda, when it comes to allies, right, we hear about the force multipliers that our allies are. We have a fundamental formal treaty commitment to 1/4 of the countries on planet Earth. Right? And in many ways, they are important partners of ours. But in each and every case, the ally needs the United States more than the United States needs the ally. And we would do well to keep that in the front of our brains.
So what's your best guess to why we're in Iran? 3 words.
The president decided. It's 4, sorry. Well, it's great. Yeah.
It's pretty good. So something pretty much everybody touched on is our industrial capability is not up to par with the Chinese, and we're wasting basically everything we have with Iran. And Professor Pape talked about it in class. Seth, that's a big part of your research. How do we fix that in 5 to 10 years? Is there any way we can get started?
So as Eduardo knows, and I just presented, so last June I spent 2 weeks in China visiting touring their advanced industries. So I've been to China many times. My first trip was 1979, and I was with 30 economists visiting the industries then. So I went back multiple times in between, but this was a trip just to look at the shop floors, and not just in Beijing. So I went to the electric vehicle manufacturer Xiaomi, that's in Beijing, also BYD, that's in Shenzhen. Wuhan, which is kind of like their Pittsburgh, it was an old steel. Now it is laser lathing and so forth, and also Alibaba and Hangzhou. The big deal, folks, is we're missing 90% of this. My Substack called the Professor Pape Substack, you're going to get a ton of this, all with the pictures.
Ever had the bingo in there? You
Yeah,
write it down.
all with this coming here, because this is different than the escalation part of the Iran war, because this is what we're missing. China is not just investing in a company like Xiaomi. They're uplifting whole cities, multiple interlinked sectors, and not just interlinked sectors of DeepSeek and Alibaba, healthcare, motor vehicle, where you go to get your driver's license.
So how do we replicate that?
The number one thing we've got to do, and this is, I think, the discussion here, is I think people don't really want to defend what is primacy and what's the source of our primacy. Why is it we have to take on China? Why can't we have a massive program to help Taiwan with drones? I've been to Taiwan many times, and yes, it's all true what Seth said. It's also true that we're going to have a hard time putting our carriers anywhere near this, and as China's missiles get longer, this just is never going to work. What we need to think about here is what is primacy, what's the taproot, and why at each step is this exactly advancing primacy? And I think we're just not having that conversation. We're having conversation, they've got more widgets than we do. I just don't think this is right. And also, Leslie, it's enlightened primacy in my view. So you're right, but think of it as like the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment understood self-interest, if too narrow, is self-defeating. With allies, I think there's lots of room for cooperating with allies here. I don't buy the idea that we're Uncle Sucker. I think we've suckered them. There's a whole story that Eduardo knows on that. But the bottom line is we're not talking about what is primacy. And I think that's the key.
What is primacy? What is primacy, sir?
Primacy is, what do you need to keep America the wealthiest country on the planet? Why? What is that really going to take? And if you say to Americans, that's okay, we're going to become like Britain and we're just going to descend and we'll become like number 5 and then number 12. Yeah. Well, let's see if Americans are up for this. And the reason, Leslie, you got to do this is I don't buy for a second Americans are going to vote for that. I just think this has to be something that and we don't ever really talk about this. And not our presidential candidates. They assert things in hints and flashes. I'm calling for an actual conversation about what's making for primacy and why is it $5 trillion wasted in Iraq and Afghanistan, at least in 18 of the 20-year wars. Why was that really worth it? Let's have that conversation. I don't think they can defend it.
So Leslie, Seth, Justin, well, I guess the 4 of you, and I would agree too, no Americans benefiting from the war, directly or indirectly. How do we deal with primacy given that situation? Now that you know what primacy means.
I mean, okay. So first of all, I still think, and it's not because I reject the premise, but I still think you haven't explained why it's important to be wealthiest. Is it because? I mean, I don't mean that as a simplistic question. Mm-hmm. Is it because if we aren't ahead, we will fall behind and we won't be able to distribute the benefits of that wealth to our people? Is it because if China's wealthier than we are, they will seek to reduce our autonomy? Like, what is it? I actually think it's important to say why it's important to be wealthiest. Because I think if you don't make that case, it just kind of reads like the guy on the football field in high school who was slightly, you've got to say why it matters in order to make a compelling case. In terms of, how do we get to a different point? I mean, let's call a spade a spade. We need different political leadership in the country. And because we need a leader who will unite the country in a way that makes it possible to invest our energy in productive things rather than counterproductive things. And that's not a partisan statement. That's a statement about leadership. Leadership shouldn't be about partisanship. So we do need a change of leadership. And because we can't actually make the investments and compete when we're sort of, arguing with ourselves in ways that are fundamentally destructive and not bringing Congress and all the rest of it along in order to make investments, adopt the right set of policies that would allow us to make the capital investments and be competitive in the way that the others are suggesting we need to.
Yeah. Seth and Justin, does it matter that we're number one or not? And if so, how do we get there?
Look, I think it is important for the U.S. to be, and I think from a selfish perspective, I think most countries would want this too, but I think that it is important for the U.S. to be economically competitive. I just want to add the defense component because at the end of the day, the U.S. needs to defend itself, its homeland. And there may be periods if, let's say, there are key choke points in the Pacific that an expansionist China were to take, we'd have to think about what strategies in cooperation with our Japanese and or Australian and South Korean allies, what steps we would take. My worry on the defense side is that we are not prepared even for a protracted conflict. We are in year 5 in Russia right now, and I think it's very hard to deter. That if you want to deter, it's very hard to deter if you've got munition stockpiles that won't get you past 1 week of a conflict with China. Our LRAS, our long-range anti-ship missile stockpile, is about 1 week right now. Our precision, our JASM and Tomahawks now 3 weeks. We just did a game last week. We ran out of Tomahawks in 3 weeks.
Really?
That for me is a problem because if the U.S. needs to project power and to protect itself, I don't think we have the capability to do that for a protracted war, particularly against a major power. So I'm not saying we go out and fight countries per se. Bob, I actually agree with you on the Afghan and Iraq war.
Getting closer.
Yeah, but I think the last book I wrote, which came out a couple of months ago, looks at the history of the U.S. defense industry and the rise and fall of the defense industrial bases of the great powers over the last century. And one of the things that that's really interesting is the U.S. did not have an industrial base essentially up to World War II. We essentially, even after World War I, we essentially took our companies, most of our companies which are commercial, and went back largely to producing commercial systems. What we were able to do during World War II was absolutely stunning in a way. I mean, and this was Roosevelt, Democratic president, seeing what was going on well before Pearl Harbor. There are a number of things that I would take as very interesting lessons for today. So what did he do? One was focus on maximizing production for protracted conflict. For the idea of strengthening deterrence first and foremost. So how do you do that? So what you need to start becoming a country that produces things. If you look at our production capacity, on the military sphere, we struggle. We saw that in Ukraine. We struggled with Javelin. We struggled with Stinger. We struggled with 155 millimeter rounds. We couldn't provide Ukraine. We weren't fighting there, but we couldn't even provide it. Our industrial base is on a peacetime footing. Second is we have acquisitions and contracting systems that are fast. We are anything but that right now. Our commercial sector moves quickly. If you look at the algorithm and the 5 commandments of Elon Musk, take Elon Musk, like him or hate him, his business practices at Tesla and at SpaceX are absolutely phenomenal. SpaceX is a phenomenal company in streamlining acquisitions and contracting. Our defense procurement process is literally broken right now. There have been some efforts to improve it, so I would do that second. Third is we've got gross supply chain weaknesses right now. We rely largely on our biggest competitor, China, for critical minerals, including the production of those critical minerals and rare earth minerals. So, I think there are some major steps we need to take on finding alternative sources for that. And then just the last thing is the workforce. Our workforce, if you visit any of our shipyards or industrial production line, we are largely operating as a 19th century country on many of our production lines. Probably less so on the aerospace, but shipyards, like 18th century if you visit Bath Iron Works or down in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I mean, I've been to all these shipyards. And you go then visit the Koreans and the Japanese, which have automation and robotics, and we don't have much of that at any of our shipyards. So for me, there's a workforce issue that involves education. And I want to go, I think it was you who mentioned that earlier, Bob. I can't remember. Somebody mentioned this comment about education and college. College is not for everybody. It was for me. It may be for all of you, but we have trade schools. We have vocational schools. That has been a history and a strength of our industrial base. And like we have not. I mean, it's if you go to the Arsenal of Democracy speech by Franklin Roosevelt in 1940, he was actually speaking to the workforce of the United States. So just to summarize, as I've looked at the last 100 years, there's a focus on production. There's an important component of acquisition and contracting, supply chains, and workforce that I think are critical to becoming a defense industrial and an industrial-based power. And we are not that. If you visit Chinese facilities, they are certainly moving in that direction with their military-civil fusion concept. So for me, it is a complete rejuvenation of the industrial base that I think is badly missing right now. Yeah.
So, Justin, you want to jump in?
Oh, go ahead. Let's keep chugging.
Great. So I wanted to ask a question because I think President Trump got elected largely. One of the things was talking about Ukraine and how we're wasting money in Ukraine and wasting resources in Ukraine. And now we're doing that in Iran. And all the 4 of you seem to agree that Iran is a waste of resources and a waste of time. But not all 4 of you think that Ukraine was a waste of resources and a waste of time. What's the strategic difference, and what's the weapon, the manufacturing capacity difference, or what's the difference between the 2 of them? Justin, you want to start?
Well, I'll mount up on my trusty Steve again.
Yeah.
The geography is the difference, right? The geography of the border between Russia and Ukraine is really bad for defense. The secular, economic, demographic, and political realities of Russia and Ukraine are really bad for the defense. Ukraine has overperformed what I thought and said in February of 2022. That's wonderful. But very similar to the way that I would argue the victories that we could have won. Maybe this is rolling a grenade with the pin out onto Dr. Jones's chair. But I think we basically achieved what we could have achieved in Afghanistan by the beginning of 2002. And all the money that we frittered away over there after that was a complete waste. I think Ukraine holding Kyiv, not letting this cockamamie concept of operations that Putin had, that he'd be greeted as liberators. Are we going to do greeted as liberators again? Do these people not listen to each other? Right? George Bush did that in Iraq. We were not greeted as liberators. But so they basically held the line. They outperformed what most people thought they could do. But now this idea that we've been chasing, I mean, our colleagues in the sort of defense establishment talk about Russian defeat, Ukrainian victory. I've never once heard either of those terms defined. We're simply throwing money at a problem that we haven't defined. And again, I totally want to associate myself with Dr. Jones's remarks on the struggles and the sort of sclerotic nature of the U.S. defense industrial base. And think about what we say and think about what we do. What we said about Ukraine was that the future of world order rises or falls on the outcome of the war in Ukraine. Is the behavior that we undertook in defense production suggestive that we actually believed what we said? We did in World War II, an incredible revolution in the way that we produced weaponry. We didn't do that here. So were we lying, or were we sort of like a Mansur-Olson sclerotic state that's incapable of shifting in short order? I think it may have been a combination of both. But the basic story about Ukraine was that the survival of a sovereign, autonomous Ukrainian state that was still subject to Russian bullying was about the best outcome you could achieve. And that outcome was achieved in fairly short order, sadly, and that was about as best as we could do.
Does anyone want to jump in on the Ukraine-Iran comparison?
Well, let me say a word about why, if we understand primacy correctly, this helps us with the Ukraine debate. So I believe that American primacy since 1990, we were 26% of the world's GDP in 1990. Today, we're 26% of the world's GDP. If you look at Germany, they've fallen as a world percent of GDP, 40%. Britain, 40%. France, 40%. Italy, 40%. Japan, 60%. So in that 30-year period, who's been the sucker here? I say not Uncle Sucker. I say that it's been a good thing for us to have stability in Europe, mostly stability in Europe. And I think that that's because we have mostly a decent economy. It doesn't, I'll answer your question also, I hope, in a second. But it's not, but what we have gained here is tremendous because we didn't fall by 40% of the world's GDP. So I think, first of all, we need to understand we have had a benefit with Europe. The second thing to understand, what does that mean, though, with Ukraine? Stability. Does that mean rolling Ukraine into Moscow? I say absolutely not. Does that mean giving Ukraine the ability to have drones? I say absolutely. Why? Because that's mostly being funded right here in Chicago by Jennifer Pritzker. This has mostly been a basically donor-driven problem because they're not trying to do HIMARS. What's happening is we went down this road of the military-industrial complex. And I also think that Seth, I actually love his book. I think he's right. I don't see us disagreeing. I see us as trying to understand how to solve those problems here. And I just want to put the focus on primacy. What makes us number one? And why be the most wealthy? Because Americans want the American dream. They don't want the top 1% to be wealthy. They want the American dream. That's why people are coming to America. That's why they stayed in America. And if we don't have the American dream anymore, I don't know what's going to happen to America, but it's not good.
I've never actually heard the American dream defined in terms of being richer than the Chinese. I've always heard it defined as being free to choose to be wealthy.
No, I'm doing it the way Raj Chetty does, which is, can you get ahead compared to your parents? Can you keep getting ahead over time?
How do you do that if we're blowing a $3 billion military?
I want to say one additional thing, because I agree with much of what's been said on Iran versus Ukraine, but the Ukraine, they're not the same wars, right? Iran had, go way back, been complying with the JCPOA, so we're told, by those who went and inspected. And yes, of course, lots of regional adventurism and all the rest of it, but that had, over the course of the last few years, been diminished in part by Israel's activities. But the Ukraine problem was that Russia invaded Ukraine, right? It was a violation of the sovereignty of an independent, autonomous European state, which is not what happened with Iran. With Iran, Israel and the United States decided to bomb the country and kill the leader. I mean, they're not the same equations, so we should be careful not to just sort of lump them in there together. And I think the problem's been very well articulated by the others, that the United States sort of asserted one objective, but actually it was, driven by this logic of not, giving them just enough so that they couldn't win, and with the logic being that they wanted to avoid an escalation that would bring NATO into a direct confrontation with Russia. But it was, always deeply flawed as a strategy. But the reason for going, I think, was for defending Ukraine was initially right. That, it's not actually a great thing to just turn a blind eye when one power rolls over the territory of another power, especially in Europe.
Seth?
Yeah, so 3 points here. The first is that I think prioritizing again, for me, I said China is the one to be particularly concerned about. How you act and what you do, we can debate. I would put second, they're not a great power anymore, but I would put the Russians second. They have nuclear weapons. They've got a large mobilizable force. They have, when you look at quantitative capabilities, reasonable capabilities, and a strong relationship with the Chinese. Same country we're talking about.
Which has gotten stronger since we pushed them into the arms of the Chinese.
And, interesting, by the way, after President Trump leaves China, who's coming to Beijing, it, of course, is Vladimir Putin. They've had over 50 meetings now. So for me, prioritization, concerned about the Russians. Second issue is the Russians are incredibly vulnerable in Ukraine. So we have, I'm going to call them an adversary. They're incredibly vulnerable. Look at the way they've performed over the last 4+ years. They're now honing in on 1.5 million casualties. Their average rate of advance is slower now than the Battle of the Somme during World War I. That's how slowly they're moving. The Ukrainians actually took more territory than the Russians in the month of February this year, mostly in the Sumy area. And so, the Russians have struggled. So we've got, for me, priority number 2 that is struggling. And so if the decision that the U.S. makes, unlike the Iranian case, is we're going to risk how many soldiers? 0. We have lost how many soldiers in Ukraine? 0, unlike the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan. And actually, in weapons exports now, the Europeans, as you may know, are buying American arms and then giving them to the Ukrainians now. It's actually a net gain in some ways, and the fighting and the dying is being done by the Ukrainians, and they are performing incredibly well. I've been to Ukraine several times, been up near the front lines in Donetsk and Luhansk. And so for me, prioritization, definitely concerned about the Russians. They are struggling mightily. And for me, the costs, financial and military costs, are actually quite low. So I'll take that bet.
I totally disagree that the military costs were quite low. We're not losing people, but those drawdowns of interceptors, those drawdowns of so many different platforms didn't start on October 8th, 2023. They started in February 23rd, 2022. The Ukraine war has been an immense suck of resources on, again, the elements that are essential to the American way of war, including in the Indo-Pacific. So if we're going to talk about prioritization, we need to loop in, even though, thank God, we haven't had U.S. casualties in large numbers in Ukraine, the drawdowns. I think there's something really important about the conflict in Ukraine that my colleagues in sort of Washington talk about, right? Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons. It's a big country. It has a lot of people. It bullies foreign countries. It has a high appetite for risk. But it's kind of sort of losing in Ukraine. Russia can either be an important sort of hegemonic or quasi-hegemonic threat in Europe. It can be losing in Ukraine, but it can't be both. If Russia is floundering in Ukraine, it is not a threat to the core interest in Europe, which is keeping European power divided. We didn't want, in World War I, we didn't want Kaiser Wilhelm to dominate Europe. In World War II, we didn't want Adolf Hitler to dominate Europe. And in the Cold War, we didn't want Joseph Stalin to dominate Europe. Vladimir Putin's Russia is not any of those states. So I'm basically agreeing Russia is floundering in Ukraine. However, that's a good news story. It's a good news story that we should fob off on the Europeans, who are, again, revealing their own preferences by sort of slow walking in defense production and other things, which we've been terribly counterproductive on because we're telling them out of one side of our mouth, we really want the European defense industrial base to spin up. And out of the other side of our mouth, we say, you better buy American or we're going to let you have it. So I think the sort of meta theme to this string of outrageous remarks is opportunity costs. And I would put opportunity costs again. Professor Pape mentioned, we've benefited by keeping the peace in Europe. And I think unless you run the sort of Back to the Future John Mearsheimer 1994 play where you think, we're going to have like World War III erupt in Europe in the 1990s, which I don't because there were French nuclear weapons, UK nuclear weapons. Germany was a sort of sclerotic, self-hating state at the time. It still kind of is sclerotic and self-hating. Unless you think that we were going to have World War III erupt there, then you have to account for all the US exertions. We spend about $100 billion a year in today's dollars defending Europe from itself. Run that play all the way back to the point where the US had many more troops in Europe. This is real money. And at the time, in the 1990s and in the 2000s, it was easy to say, we will have more guns and more butter forever. I have bad news. We're $40 trillion in debt. We're adding to that debt at the rate of $2 trillion a year. And guess what? The top three items in the federal budget, healthcare, Social Security, and interest on the debt, are basically not amenable to near-term policy resolutions. Guess what the fourth item is? The defense budget. So we have secular downward pressure on defense budgets. Hawks and doves alike say that we are basically insolvent, to use Walter Lippmann's phrase, right? What we're trying to achieve in the world is under-resourced to the tune of $1 trillion a year. The United States comprises about 40% of world military spending before the sort of sugar high plan for fiscal 2027. With our treaty allies, vaunted treaty allies, we comprise 2/3 of total world military spending. That's a lot. And we're talking about having to add another $500 billion a year. We have a strategy problem. We don't have a resource problem.
Well, I'm going to give you guys just a second to respond. We're going to go to questions in about 5 minutes, so prepare for that. So I'm going to give each of you guys about a minute to answer, and there you go. Pape?
So I just want to bring us back for a moment to Iran. So again, we have this big issue coming up. President Trump's back. Iran controls Hormuz. Today I was just on, I do this thing on UAE, and I was on with a diplomat in Iran. I didn't know I was coming on with Tehran, but I didn't get off, and it was really interesting. I see no sign they're giving up. For 45 minutes, I was on with this guy. I see no sign they're giving up Hormuz, which means if we don't use U.S. military ground pressure or air pressure, 3-4 years from now, is Iran giving up Hormuz? I don't think so. Maybe they'll cut us a bit of a break, but that's the future. And in 2 years from now, will they have a working nuclear weapon? Why not? Why not? So we do nothing, okay? That is, we just say, even keep the blockade. I think you can see future number one. Future number two is right now, ground or air pressure by the United States. I'm saying once we think about primacy, there's a third option, which is the UAE, Saudi Arabia, we hand over the issue of the blockade to them. And I think that's a better third strategy than anything I've heard. And if we have a third strategy, other than just, please give us back the deal, I mean, I just want to know what that really is. And I think that comes from correctly understanding primacy should be our number one goal.
Seth, you want a minute?
I think the problem. I think the problem with number three right now is that the Emiratis, the Saudis, Bahrainis, and the Omanis would disagree with you and say we don't want to go in there. So I think the problem you have
Then
is,
let them get toppled. Because that's what I'm telling them literally every day on Zooms, is that here's your choice. What's going to happen when they become, after 3 or 4 years of Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz, Saudi and Emirati GDP going down 30% over 4 years, and all that power growing, they're going to topple those governments. So I'm saying survival is why they should do it.
there is also the political reality in the United States of gas prices, which are now headed to the mid-5s on the East Coast. And by the end of May, the CEO of one of the largest U.S. companies said it could be in the mid-6s.
So then you're on the military escalation ladder.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying I'm on the ladder of we shouldn't have done it in the first place.
Well, of course. No, I think we all got that. Yeah.
Leslie, one of
I mean, this is such a depressing conversation on a Friday night at a sunny campus. But it's exactly right. Like, we are stuck in between a rock and a hard place. I mean, I assume that you'll sort of laugh at this idea that the British and the French, who are convening these 40 nations to try and come up with a plan for governing the Strait once there's a actual deal, if there is to ever be a deal between the U.S., Iran, and maybe Israel. I don't know if the 40...
Well, it doesn't do any harm, Leslie. It doesn't do any harm, but it's not going to stop the actual choices.
It's not, but maybe it can be a few others to give cover. But yeah, no, I guess I don't see any. I'm guessing here, but I don't see. I personally suspect that President Trump has no real interest in escalation right now, because he kind of probably knows what a mess he's in and that it could get worse. But God, the next person who has to inherit this problem. This is a U.S. leader who's created an extraordinary not to say that others haven't as well, but has, over the course of these 4 years, created a terrible inheritance problem for the next leader. Be careful what you wish for if you decide to run for president.
Awesome. Well, does anyone have any questions? Let's go to Arthur there.
We started to disagree, which is good, or among the panel.
Hey, can everyone hear me? I'm Arthur Hicks, fourth-year undergrads. I saw a piece of news that the welders at the Navy Yard in Norfolk, Virginia, are paid around $17 an hour. So that's $34,000 a year pre-taxes. So I can imagine a situation where someone taps them on the shoulder and says, "Hey, just don't do your job as well as you could. Just make that ship a little bit weaker." And that would play into our adversary's hands. So how are we supposed to defend ourselves, and how are we supposed to have a national security strategy if the efficiency model leads us to just choke the workers who make our ships?
You guys want to respond?
I mean, look, this is a big challenge. Actually, the problem when you visit shipyards, take Groton, where we build our nuclear-powered submarines, our Virginia and Columbia class. The problem there is actually that people are getting hired at that wage level. People are getting hired by Costco or Walmart, and we have been down this road before. You got two options. One is, well, you may have more than that. One is there are at least two allies, South Korea and Japan, that build an extraordinary number of ships. So we actually do pay our aerospace workforce much better. So option number one is you essentially subcontract some of you're probably not going to want to do it with your aircraft carriers or your nuclear-powered submarines, just because of the sensitivities involved. One is you essentially subcontract that out to foreign allies that can actually do this. All of us have the ability to buy cars made in the United States that are built here, BMW in Spartanburg, South Carolina. The U.S. has just recently, as we all, I think, know, allowed the Hanwha to buy Philly Shipyard. So we do have now massive investment. TSMC, same thing in Arizona. So with that foreign investment, one of the things that's been interesting about Philly is wages have gone up for work for at the shipyard in Philadelphia. So this is make it a competitive market. and allow foreign competition into our shipbuilding industry, that will start increase. And a second issue, which I would also like to see, is more government investment in this issue, both in terms of raising pay for our workforce, but also providing education to the workforce, so that the welder you're talking about, most welders aren't going to go to college, but they will go to vocational or trade schools. We've made no investments along those lines. So I have a couple of things that I think are strong options. There's another shipyard that the Pentagon is discussing having a foreign shipyard company buy and then have the U.S. oversee. I think that has a huge value in starting to solve that problem.
Let's go to one more quick question, yeah. Marcos?
Thank you, and thank you for the panel. My name is Marcos. I'm a second year here in the college. Professor Pape, earlier you mentioned solar in China as this, the spectacular win for China's energy policy. I think if you look at the numbers, it's less than 10%, maybe even 5% of their real energy use, and most of it remains in coal, which we see as a little bit prehistoric today. And this whole conversation has been revolving around really like what energy use we have. It's Venezuela, it's Iran. And so I wonder, is this sort of letting go of Iran, letting go of the Strait of Hormuz, as Seth pointed out with the prices, right, of gas and what Americans are really facing, is that something that we can take a strategy and instead of just trusting the free open markets to decide what energy is the best to invest in?
Well, the big problem with trying to physically, militarily take back the Strait of Hormuz is we have no way to do that without eating a lot of casualties. Now, my work, I've been studying air power for 30 years. I've taught for the U.S. Air Force. Before the war, I wrote a piece where I predicted if we'd bombed, we'd kill leaders, ... but they would lash back, take Hormuz, and also then we'd be in a ground power dilemma. So that's been the case now for almost 12 weeks. Where we're in this ground power dilemma. The problem with the ground power dilemma and why it's a dilemma is it's not just whether you take Karg or 2 square miles of beach near Hormuz. There is no solid ground power option. What that means is you might start then a ground war by having a massive air war, take out all the electric power, not because exactly you want to hurt everybody, but because you're trying to diminish all of the possible attacks against you. And having taught with the strategic bombers in the Air Force, John Warden, it sounds almost exactly like that's who's advising Trump. I mean, I spent years with them, day by day, every day for 3 years, arguing with them on this. And I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it will cause Iran to buckle. I don't think that it will significantly diminish the ground casualties. But the fact of the matter is that this is what Americans need to hear, that this is not, we don't know what will happen if we start down the military escalation road. Notice there's not a single historical example being given of an economic blockade bringing an enemy to its knees in just a couple of months or even years. And we had essentially an economic blockade on Saddam Hussein's oil for 12 solid years, bringing down that economy 47% a year for 12 years. Still, we had to go in with the ground war. And that then went to a forever war. So my point here is that, am I absolutely sure? So visiting the factories, they literally are showing me the plans where the advanced industries, not everybody in China, but the advanced industries, that 11% you're describing, happens to match almost exactly the portion of their economy that's in those advanced industries. Well, that's what we should be doing. We should be not going into solar because it's the liberal thing to do, because it saves the planet. We should be going into solar because we need fantastic amounts of electric power. And we've got to figure out how are we going to do that without jacking up the price of everybody's electric bill here. And that's why we have to talk about the wealth of our country. Because if we just simply don't, then what we're going to end up doing is we're not going to get there. But I certainly think the ground or the military options here, I think are going to be just stunningly horrendous once we go down those roads.
Can I add one comment? This was not well known. The president came 24 hours away from executing, because I know what the plans were, executing and I'm not saying this was going to be successful.
The Esfahan.
A solely air cover operation. He had gotten insurance companies involved to buy in on it at the beginning of last week. And so the U.S. was going to provide A-10s, MQ-9s, and other fighter F-35s to essentially provide an air cover for ships, but not put destroyers through or cruisers through, because I don't think he wanted to see casualties. Not put the Muse on the ground to take any islands, but just provide air cover. He pulled the plug right at the last minute because one of the French vessels got hit and decided it was not going to be successful. So that option did not work out.
And it's still there.
We have like 3 more minutes here. Can we get to one more question real quickly? Let's go here in the front. Yeah, go for it.
Well, thank you so much for being here. My name is Tanya. I'm a second year in the college.
That's fine.
Wait, you got to get they can't hear you online.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Tanya. I'm a second year in the college, and I had a question for Mr. Jones. You talked a lot about like how our shipbuilding capacity in the United States is just minuscule compared to that of China. And one of the big reasons like why the US won World War II is the fact that they were just able to out-manufacture like competitors. It's like the US had like barrages of ice cream for the soldiers in the Pacific while the Japanese were starving. So what do you think should be the future of the Jones Act in regards to like increasing like American shipbuilding capabilities?
I was just having a conversation with Senator Kelly about this last week. I think you kill it. I think the Jones Act has outlived its importance. It would actually free up competition in shipbuilding. You know, when you open up the hood of an F-35 aircraft, the supply chain is global. You've got parts from around the world. In fact, that same aircraft is built in Japan and also in Italy. Why are we shielding our entire shipbuilding from global competition? So Jones Act has been, for me, one of the worst implications of that. And even in the case like the Hanwha Philly shipyard, you actually have American workers. You've got some foreign workers there too, but you've got American workers. Now foreign-owned shipyard in the U.S. So I would get rid of the Jones Act, period.
Great. Well, let's do this. Give me 3 words for the next 5 years of American foreign policy. The best you can.
3 words?
3 or 5, something like that.
Fixing the damage.
China, China, China.
I'll give you 4. Stuck in escalation trap. In 5 years, we're not getting out.
Build, invest, transform.
Sounds great. Well, thank you guys for coming. This has been great. Thank you for the audience. And we'll have the next panel soon. Thank you so much.
Leslie, that was excellent.
Good luck with your interview.
Yeah. You did
All right.
fantastic
Thank you.
job.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Our next panel concerns building America's future, the U.S. in the world of AI. My name is Elijah Lutweiler, a staff writer for the Chicago Thinker and a graduate student in the Divinity School. I'll begin by introducing the distinguished speakers joining us tonight. We have Donald R. Wilson, who founded DRW in 1992 and has grown it into a global trading and investment firm, spanning financial markets, venture capital, real estate, and crypto assets. In addition to his leadership in finance and market innovation, he is deeply involved in philanthropy and education, including serving as a trustee of the University of Chicago, where he is an alumni. Jordan Blashek is the co-founder and managing partner of America's Frontier Fund, where he works at the intersection of technology, national security, and American industrial strategy. A U.S. Marine Corps veteran who served in Afghanistan, he holds a JD from Yale Law School, an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business, and a BA from Princeton University. He is also co-author of the book Union, a Democrat, a Republican, and a Search for Common Ground. Alec Litowitz is the founder and former CEO of Magnetar Capital and now leads Reimagined Ventures, an office investing across venture capital, real estate, hospitality, and more. He is a founding partner of Citadel and also the Center for Enlightened Disagreement at Northwestern. He's also been active in financial education, expanding access to financial literacy for students. Speaking of, Alec's new book, The Adaptability Quotient, A Practical Guide to Navigating an Uncertain Era, launches in September, and we are excited to share that 300 of our attendees can pre-order the book for free. Moderating this panel tonight, we have Shubhaankar Gupta. Shub is a third-year Odyssey Scholar in the college, majoring in statistics, and serves as the Director of Development at the Chicago Thinker. He is also a RISE Fellow, announced by Schmidt Futures and the Rhodes Trust. Join me in welcoming our speakers.
Wow, thank you for that introduction, Elijah. We have a very distinguished panel here, and we're going to talk about a topic that is greatly contended today, artificial intelligence. Now, as we speak, currently, President Trump is flying back with a delegation that he led to China with top American leaders in AI. There's a lot of debate around whether we should let the free markets outcompete China, whether or not we should even try to outcompete China, or whether the government should intervene in order to have, in order to facilitate AI development. Now, my first question is for Jordan. As someone who's served in Afghanistan as a veteran and now invests in AI firms, how do you think, to what extent do you feel the government should intervene in order to accelerate AI development, if at all?
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Thank you to everyone in the audience for being here on a Friday night. And it's an honor to sit next to two titans of the financial world. I don't really know why you invited me here. I think the key question is not should the government intervene. It's what should the government be doing. The AI race is a civilizational competition. If we win this race, the next 100 years are built on American values, values of liberal democracy, human rights, individual autonomy. And if we lose this race, we will cede the future to an authoritarian power like China. And the question is, what does it take to win this race? This race is not just about AI. It's about how intelligence gets filtered across all of society. And it takes building across energy, manufacturing, compute, and talent and workforce to all align in order to win. And there are some things that we need the government to step in and do, or we need them to step away and let the free market do. And the key point I would make is that the pace of artificial intelligence is so high, there's no chance the government can keep up and make the right choices for how to intervene and how to build the economy. The only organizational unit that can move fast enough to keep up with this race and to make sure we lead it is entrepreneurs, it's founders, it's people who can move and ideate and test and iterate in the market. And we need the government to be supportive of that. Sometimes that means putting in place the right incentive structures through taxes. Sometimes it means subsidizing or purchasing things that we need to get out there right now. But a lot of it is just getting out of the way and letting our entrepreneurs do what they do best.
I see. So you do believe in that I would classify as a fairly free market solution to the problem that you stated. Now, Don and then Alec, to what extent do you see China as a threat? And to what extent should the United States, in order to protect its interests, pursue AI development to outcompete China?
Yeah, so I think I'm in the same place as Jordan, that there's no way that the government can solve these problems. But the government can slow them down. They can mess it up, or they can do things to help progress at a faster pace. So what are some examples? Europe, I think, really wants to regulate AI models. Mm-hmm. That's a disaster. That's how you slow everything down. And right now, there's a little bit of a tinge of that with you've probably all heard about Mythos, the latest Anthropic model. Incredibly powerful, a lot of concern about the ability to hack things using Mythos. And, and the Anthropic team has kind of been tapped on the shoulder and told to slow it down. And I don't know. I mean, I get it, but I think slowing this stuff down is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, all of this requires massive amounts of power. And so, and we have a pretty broken grid. So doing things to improve the grid, to make it easier to deploy new power plants, nuclear power plants, et cetera, in order to facilitate more data center construction, that's a super constructive thing to do. The other thing to think about is what should our policy be as far as chip exports?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the word was that maybe there will be a deal to export H100s to China. And I think you can have a real debate about whether H100s are kind of old enough, like second or third generation enough, so that doesn't do too much harm. The argument to do it is, well, if we don't do it, then they're forced to kind of go and build their own stuff, and maybe that's gonna cause them to catch up. So maybe we're better off giving them kind of the slightly older stuff. But it's not an easy answer.
I see. So you reflected some agreement with Jordan on that. I see. And now, Alec, building off of what you just said, Don, the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, after Trump's trip, expressed the need for both China and the U.S. government to collaborate in order to regulate AI models and large language models. Is that something that you personally support? And how, you specialize in identifying trends in industrial growth. And is that something that you would support? And how do you see the government best supporting growth in artificial intelligence?
I probably would agree with what these gentlemen said, but maybe I'll zoom out and abstract a little bit. And just, at first principles, I think that nations compete on the adaptive capacity of both their people and institutions. And so at the end of the day, U.S. exceptionalism has been a balance, if you will, of incredible power of ingenuity, of what we have in the United States sometimes is less coordination at the top, but an incredibly powerful edge experimentation. We have incredible capital markets. We can accelerate faster, probably than China. China has extreme coordination de facto, but doesn't have the same edge experimentation, right? And so, when you think about who wins what? From a technology perspective, I would think that those two types of, platforms, if you will, or structures would favor the U.S. over China from a technological development. But I agree that the question then becomes, is that sufficient? I mean, the U.S. hasn't become what it is because it's just free-run capitalism. Effectively, institutions at the national level serve as a vessel for coordination, right? So I think Jordan or Don both talked about, right now, we do a lot in energy, Magnetar and some of the spin-offs that I'm involved in of Magnetar, and then we do a lot with data centers, CoreWeave and otherwise. And one of the big impediments, it's land shell power, but to build land shell power, it's plumbers, it's electricians. So we could create a incredible employment workforce solution that would be at the bottom level, enable us to compete. Those are orchestration type effects that you expect, and those are the things that a government can do as opposed to individual organizations. So I would sit and say simply, if I zoom out, that it requires both this entrepreneurial spirit combined with this structural aspect to it that is brought by governments. There is a human element to this writ large across us as a species. That should involve some level of coordination with China. You might sit and go, well, how is that possible? But let's just look. Nuclear weapons have been around for 80 years. Has anybody seen one used in the last 80 years? There is a concept at some point around what I'll call adaptive coordination, right? If we know something's horrible, then we might not both do it. It's a game theory, but AI is a bit uncertain. It makes game theory more complex. So I believe that there is some orchestration at the government level. It gets a little complex beyond that. I'll stop there because I've used up a lot of time.
No, okay, that's very interesting. Now, moving back to resources, and both Don and Alec spoke about resources a bit. You, Don, have been working on making compute a commodity over the last few years. Can you describe what that looks like and where you see the future of that very niche technology headed?
Yeah, so I spend a decent amount of time in Silicon Valley, and so it was pretty clear that that compute was becoming a scarce resource a few years ago, and I formed this thesis that compute would become a commodity, and not only that within the next 10 years, the world will spend more money per year on compute than on crude oil. But what you see, especially with the neoclouds, these independent companies as opposed to the hyperscalers that are just buying GPUs and renting them out, in many cases, their cost of capital is quite high. I mean, CoreWeave did a good job because they entered into some long-term contract with some creditworthy companies, but some of the other ones, pay through the nose for capital. And the reason for that is that there's no predictability about the future price of compute. And people have these arguments of, what's the useful life of the latest NVIDIA chip? Is it 3 years, or is it 10 years, or is it somewhere in between? And what will the trajectory of the price of that NVIDIA chip be? Now, imagine if there were futures contracts that traded kind of like electricity contracts, where there's one for each month, and it reflects the average hourly price of a specific chip. If that existed, then a neocloud could, let's say, buy the GPUs and then maybe hedge out the first 4 or 5 years of compute, and then rent them out on a short-term basis to even startups that don't have credit. They would de-risk that forward price, and they would be able to fund at a much cheaper rate. And then on the flip side, obviously AI companies that kind of know that they're going to need compute in the future could buy a strip of futures, and then as they get closer to their training run or their inference demands start to grow, then they can go and buy the exact cluster that they need, unwind the futures contract, but they've kind of locked in something close to the pricing that they're going to incur. So we started 2 companies. One is called Silicon Data. The other is called Compute Exchange. Compute Exchange is a spot market for compute where you can go on the website and send out an RFQ, and a bunch of neoclouds respond to the RFQ. And Silicon Data has, collects any and all data about the space, and they've built these very effective indices for each GPU. So, when there's a article in the Wall Street Journal about, is this a bubble or not, they generally quote, show a picture of the Silicon Data Index. And actually recently, we saw this really interesting phenomenon. Going into December, the price of an H100 just kept on going down, down, down. And then December 15th, it turned around, and since then it's gone up and to the right. It's making new highs. And why? What happened mid-December? Claude 4.5 came out. It's just amazing. So this week on Tuesday, we announced that Silicon Data licensed its indices to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the largest exchange in the world, to launch GPU futures, which will be listed later this year. So
that is very interesting, and especially the part about Claude 4.5 facilitating that whole shift in
GPU prices. Now, you worked as a trader all of your life, and that probably guides why you've been so successful in doing this. Jordan, you were a veteran who served in Afghanistan on the field. What are some experiences on the field that that guide how you invest in defense companies and AI companies and people working in that area today?
It's a good question. So I served in the Marine Corps. For those who don't know, the Marines are a rapid response force in a sense. We historically have been based on Navy ships. We do ship-to-shore type missions, and one of our missions when we were commissioned under the National Security Act in 1947 is to serve at the pleasure of the president, meaning if the president needs something, we do it. That's why there's always the saying, send in the Marines. And so we've been highly adaptive over the years, and whether it's in Afghanistan where I served and we had to figure out how to train the Afghan army for combat operations, or we're doing things like patrolling the Persian Gulf today to try to keep it open through the Straits of Hormuz. The Marines have historically just been taught to always be flexible, be super frugal, adapt, and then ultimately overcome, whatever it is we're told to do. And I think that, that at like the most generic level, when I invest in a company, I'm looking for founders who embody a lot of those principles. We want to see individuals who, no matter what's thrown at them, they're going to be able to figure it out. They'll run through walls to do it. And they have an incredible grit, a sense of frugality. They try to make their resources go as far as possible. And they look for these like key either centers of gravity or critical vulnerabilities that allow them to do something important. And if I take that and apply it into investment in AI, again, these are sort of generic principles about what you look for in a great founder. In AI, I think the important thing that we've started using as a framework is AI is making a lot of things abundant. It's making intelligence abundant. It's making the ability to do service work very abundant. And so the question in that is now what becomes the scarce resource? You always have to find the scarce resource to understand where value is going to accrue. And that might be talent. It could be that there's a very small number of AI researchers that are the best in the world at a certain kind of thing. And if this company has that scarce resource, that is interesting to invest in. It could be on the energy or compute front. And if there's access to a scarce resource, whether that's turbines or a certain piece of land that has the right permitting, those all become very interesting. And so I think a key principle for us as we look to invest in this new AI era is both the people behind it, what are the qualities that make them just incredible entrepreneurs, make them able to lead great teams and marshal them towards a certain mission. And then the next is we look for that scarce resource. What is it that's going to accrue value in an era where many things are becoming very abundant?
I see. And I guess a follow-up to that is, how do you see the future of warfare changing, and how do you think it is changing now?
We're in this interesting transition moment. Historically, technology has had this important effect on warfare. Changes in technology change the nature of war, and changes in the nature of war can really affect the global order. I think that's sort of a very simple proposition. And AI is one of the biggest technological revolutions we've had in a very long time. And so inevitably, it's going to change war. I think the very simple framework is it's going to make small, attritable, swarm-type systems very common on the battlefield. So if you look at Ukraine, the use of drones has become ubiquitous. The Ukrainians are using 20,000 drones per month. And the whole battlefield is now just one big sort of hellscape of drones flying and soldiers sitting in bunkers. So you can begin to see what that looks like. We're at the very early innings of this. One of the kind of interesting anecdotes about the operations in Iran is that not a single one of these new defense tech companies that we've all been investing in over the last 7 years has been on the battlefield. They're just not there. And it means that we've had a sea change in how the Defense Department buys technology from the private sector. We've seen a huge influx, mostly due to Anduril, of companies and founders that want to build for defense, but it's still super early. And the reason is, the military is not going to send into theaters of combat technologies that are not proven. And we just haven't had a chance to really prove these technologies over and over again. So while this transition to small autonomous swarm attritable technologies is going to happen, and it's going to proliferate across all domains of warfare, it's still in the very, very early innings. It means for students, there's a lot of opportunity to go build there. And it means for anyone thinking geostrategically, you have to factor in that we see this wave coming, warfare is changing, and yet we're still caught between kind of the old and the new in the way we fight on the battlefield.
Okay, that is okay. And it is very interesting to see how, especially in Ukraine today, you don't have a lot of even in-person combat. But my next question actually is for Alec. Over the next decade, how do you see the life of the average American change as a result of AI? And what are some technologies today that you think have a lot of promise going forward? Of course, AI is a very all-encapsulating word, but if there's something specific that you are looking into.
Well, maybe I'll zoom out for a second again, because we have to get to that point. So my biggest concern, and there's lots of opportunities on the right side, and we could talk about what technologies I think are, but I do think that to get to the promise of the benefit of the sort of the right tail of things, and we're already getting some, where we'll get breakthroughs in healthcare, we'll get abundance, in certain things that were scarce, certainly if you want to call it at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Cheaper intelligence will be free, production of certain items that were scarce will be free. But I think that one of the challenges that we're going to face is that when intelligence becomes commoditized and free, the scarce resource becomes agency. I think that becomes the most important. And the only way to recover agency is through that adaptation. So I think that what needs to happen first is that both at the individual level, there has to be so one of the things that has to change is potentially education and the way we train people to become adaptive. What worked in a prior regime, what worked in prior history, this is a very different moment, and it'll get a little to where I'll go in your answer direct to your question. But if you go look at the first industrial revolution and the second industrial revolution, we effectively transformed atoms. It was physical. We offloaded physical labor. We had a algorithm. It made a machine out of our instructions, and it came back, and a hammer's a hammer, and a machine's a machine. In the third industrial revolution, we took bits, and we manipulated bits, and we offloaded storage, retrieval, computation. But again, the bits came back, a calculation, the way it was formulated. This is a different revolution. In my opinion, this is not the fourth industrial revolution. This is the second cognitive revolution, after when we had language in humans. Because here, tokens, while they're technically bits, they're meaning making. When you go ask a question to an LLM, and what comes back is a compression. That compression is normally what we do. It gives you an answer. It doesn't give you 1 million pages of Google where you have to go synthesize and compress. It gives you something to compress. So the fear is that while it's incredibly good at things like coding, things like math, because it can digitally verify it, when it requires embodied verification, it's not that good. But it's so fluent that you as a human sit and go, it's really easy to take that answer. I'll just go apply it in my life. So the fear is that we'll live in this world of complacency, and that will effectively let our cognition atrophy. I'm worried about that, and how we create technologies, and both at the institutional level and others, that repair that or stave off that cognitive atrophy. The reality is, though, that an answer direct to your question on what does that mean for the positive right side, what tools and things, I think both of the other gentlemen on the stage are talking and have talked about. Part of the reason I even stepped away from running Magnetar was the combination of data, compute, and material science is causing a punctuated equilibrium. It's causing a step function change in energy and transition, synthetic biology, the new financial rail system, for lack of a better word, frontier sciences, AI, quantum, fusion, space, defense, robotics. the things that we're going to see are things that one even can't imagine. If you can get to the point, I'm not saying we're there, it's always 20 years off, but if you can get to fusion, think about the cost not only of intelligence goes to zero, if the cost of energy, which is pretty much the largest input in everything, goes to zero, right? Why do we not have desalination plants all over the place? Cost of energy. If the cost of energy goes to zero, it's so transformative, right? It's just massively. So like if we're at the cutting edge or getting closer to fusion, what does that bring about? And imagine what that could be. Same thing on, where we, fuse over AI and robotics. Can we get to a point where AI and LLMs are not just taking in language, they can listen and other things, but they're not embodied, right? And so we're going to see an incredible number of changes on the positive side, but society has to be able to metabolize that change, both at the individual and the institutional level. And my question is, those are great things and we could talk about what's coming, but we better prepare ourselves as a society and as people for that change, because it doesn't look like anything we've experienced before. This is a cognitive revolution. It's not atoms and bits.
I see. Now that is very interesting. And could you please be a little more specific on what exactly the second cognitive revolution looks like? And in your previous answer, you briefly referenced education and how educational institutions have to change to facilitate this or facilitate around it. Could you be more specific how?
So the second cognitive revolution, the argument basically is that if you go to what I said about atoms and bits, the first, second, and third revolutions, they were about how we work. This is about how we think. We've never had a participant in our thinking. We've never offloaded judgment. What comes back in that compression is a recommendation, it's a judgment, it's generative AI. It is very different than what we've had before. So I think to think that it's not being used or is going to be used or is already being used, I'm leaving aside agents that are doing subroutines, and even though you have to prompt it, it is making judgmental decisions by itself, right? So yes, with a reward function, but it is still doing it. So at the end of the day, we are now in a, not post-human world, of course, we're in a post-human only narrative world. That's gone. Forever, we've been the only narrators. Everything you got on Google was a human output. It's not true anymore. So that's just a different, it's got incredible capability. It could be wonderful in many ways. But to not think about the repercussions of it is to, I like to say AI is a tool at the interface. It is a regime shift at the system level. It is not like other tools. It's different. And then on education, I would say, well, if the defining characteristic of what you need is to become adaptive, what is school? Mostly, sorry, maybe not USC, I'm a graduate of grad school here. But the reality is that a lot of school is convergent. It's teaching you to come up with one answer. But I'm sure if you ask these gentlemen, whether it's in military, whether it's in business or otherwise, most of what we deal with every day is divergent problems that there is no right answer. You're just you're going through, I reduce things down first principles. I come up with theory, a hypothesis. I figure out how to test it. I test it. I want the fastest feedback loops possible. I turn around and I revise my theory. That's what AI can't do. That humans can do it. We can go and be in the muck, in the mud, experiencing. So how do we create an education system that allows people more freedom, right? I like to say sometimes no wonder. People, everybody here probably who's an undergrad can feel it. The old deal, the old causal deal where I do well, I get a job, that relationship, that old form of agency is over. So what it requires is some changes as trusted institutions that they can adapt as well, and that they could be places where people can learn to adapt, to take this moment when you have very little to lose as a young person, and go explore across differences. I mean, someone mentioned at the beginning, we created the Litowitz Center for Enlightened Disagreement at Northwestern because part of what you're supposed to do in school is talk across in a constructive way. How are we different? How are we the same? If we can't have a dialogue at the university level and between people, how are we going to create society level stabilizers? How are we going to create rules and vessels for that entrepreneurship if we don't even have a shared language? So I think that we need a shared language for how people can go forward in this world, given and contingent on the fact that it looks very different than it did in the past.
I see. My next question is for Dawn, and it pertains to cryptocurrencies. Where do you see the future of cryptocurrencies going, and to what extent do you think the government should be involved in them?
So, we've been involved in the crypto space for a very long time. In 2014, we set up Cumberland, which is one of the largest B2B liquidity providers in the space. But I thought at the time that there was some small chance that the world would view Bitcoin as digital gold. I don't know, maybe we're kind of getting closer to a bigger percentage of the world believing that. That's fine. I think that the more interesting thing is actually one of the things that blockchain enables is the ability to transfer value without an intermediary immediately 24/7. And that capability is something that has the potential to dramatically improve traditional financial markets, to make them more resilient, to make them more efficient. And of course, there is now this push to make traditional financial markets 24/7. The equity markets are kind of moving towards 24/5, and really they're already in some sense 24/7 because Hyperliquid is trading through weekends, and when the Iran war started, everybody was looking at the price of oil on Hyperliquid. That's of course causing the incumbent exchanges to wake up and go like, oh, okay, I guess we need to do this sooner than we kind of thought. But as soon as you do that, you need to move cash on weekends. You need to move it at night. You need to be able to move treasuries as collateral. And so that's, I think, the big unlock that's happening. We've been working for a very long time on a chain called the Canton Network, which is a public blockchain, but with privacy that most of the major financial institutions are now connecting to. And most importantly, the DTCC, which is the place that clears all US equities, all corporate bonds, US corporate bonds, municipal bonds, and a lot of US treasuries, is starting this summer going to give asset owners the option of moving their assets onto the Canton blockchain. Once you do that, now you can move your treasury or your stock 24/7. You can use it as collateral in new ways that you couldn't use it before. You can, on a Saturday morning, you can take a United States Treasury that you fully paid for and transform that into tokenized cash. We've been doing that. There have been, 5 or 6 kind of practice trades, but real trades where we took a treasury, we asked the DTCC, hey, please put it on Canton Network, and then we repoed it out on a Saturday morning, got USDC back, and then unwound it a little bit later. So this is all happening, and it's going to have profound benefits for asset owners. Yeah. One of the other things I'll say is, right now, if there's a stock that is hard to borrow, there are a bunch of hedge funds that want to short it. If you're long the stock, you probably get little or no benefit from the fact that everybody wants to be short that stock. There are a bunch of Wall Street banks that kind of split up that benefit. And maybe if you have a lot of assets, you can negotiate that some portion of it gets passed on to you. Once this stuff is on chain, you can control your own stock loan. You can lend it out yourself and collect 100% of that hard to borrow characteristic. So there's a huge benefit to asset owners.
That sounds very exciting. And speaking of,
he's increasing agency for everybody. That's what
that is definitely increasing agency. Yes.
Yeah. My next question is about another very exciting space. Now, both Jordan and Alec invest in space tech companies. Where do you see the future of space going, and how realistic is it for humans to have a colony sometime in the next half century?
On Mars?
You can,
or on the moon?
That's something you can.
Look, I think this is right around the corner. We are big investors in a company called Icon. Icon started as a 3D printing construction company looking to solve the housing crisis. How do you dramatically drop the cost of building new homes? They recently won a contract from NASA to build the moon base. And so Artemis, the new NASA program that is looking to bring us back to the moon, has basically said we want a moon base in the next 5 years. And so this company is working right now with NASA scientists to figure out how you do that. And it's an incredibly hard problem. If you think about the moon, it is a harsh environment. You have micro asteroids or micrometeors that are constantly bombarding the surface of the moon. These are tiny little rocks that are flying 30,000 miles per hour. You have to figure out how to prevent those from destroying all your equipment. You don't want to have to take huge amounts of concrete up there. So what do? You have to take the moon dust and figure out how to turn that into something that could be used to build. But these are solvable problems. And when you give innovators, scientists, American entrepreneurs the task of go figure out how to do this, we're actually incredibly good at that. And so I think the likelihood that we will have a moon base in the next 10 years, I put at close to 100%.
I would also, so I've been invested in SpaceX since 2018, and I think there was two reasons why I did it, and I think, I agree with everything Jordan just said, but I would add two things that I think are often overlooked. So one is that a lot of the technology that is developed for the purpose of, moon, Artemis or Apollo, trickles down and becomes very impactful back on Earth. Right? So along the way to solving those problems, you solve lots of other terrestrial problems. The second is that it provides hope and meaning, which is in short supply right now. What are we doing? What do these things mean? What does this change mean? Like, there's lack of a narrative. I think that, if you go back to this Artemis mission that just occurred, like when, the furthest humans ever, I mean, people who had no interest typically in other things were all glued to what was going on. Why? Why is that? And I think it's partly because people are searching for meaning, that this is humans, we're exploring. I mean, right now, maybe everybody here knows or not, the universe is what we think is 92, 93 billion light years across. Voyager, which is the furthest any human object has ever gone, is 1 light day, and humans have gone 1 light second. I mean, just like, we've gone nowhere. I mean, we've accomplished a lot. But I think that's part of these sort of like, hope is an incredible motivator. I think it gives you perspective. You look back at the Earth and you realize, talk about coordination. We can talk about national security, and we do. But twice in history, all the countries used to be right next to each other. Pangaea, the one before it, once again, Proxima Pangaea, we'll all go back again. Can fight over Taiwan, but at some point in the future, it's just going to be connected to all the other land masses. So, I mean, in some ways, in perspective, I think space, is very meaningful back on Earth, both technologically and psychologically.
I just want to say I completely agree with that. Who here watched the Artemis launch? It brought me to tears. It was one of the few things in, I don't know how long, that everyone I know watched it. Everyone I know had that common feeling of pride and hope and excitement. And ultimately, that common experience is what unites us. It's what allows you to have common bond and disagreement and get to a place where we can iterate together on what a better society looks like. And I think for too long, Americans did not feel a sense of hope and excitement. And it feels like the space race, the ability to go back, to expand into new frontiers, is reigniting that. And I think it's such an important thing. I think what SpaceX has done is unbelievable. The amount of launch they're doing, the cost they've dropped it down to, it has opened up space as a new area of commerce, as a new frontier to explore. And that is something so deeply in the American soul that we want to explore frontiers, that bringing it back is, I think, such a powerful thing for the American psyche as we enter this new era of change and adaptability. So I'm going to steal your word.
No, please. And a lot of their customers are competitors, right? I mean, at the end of the day, but it's supporting other U.S.-based companies and around the world. But it's a public good, both in the U.S. and further out.
Yeah. Now, before we wrap up and move on to question and answers, I wanted to ask Don if he had any significant exposure to space or investments in space or serious opinions on the matter.
I mean, here I agree that space is super exciting. I mean, I have some investment in SpaceX, and actually was fortunate enough to go and tour the Starbase and see it all. And I mean, it is just amazing what they've been able to accomplish. And of course, now there's this talk of data centers in space, and that is potentially a far more efficient way of scaling out the AI demands for power, and so yeah, I think it's super exciting. I think that it's a far more exciting thing for everybody to gather around and root for than, will the Cubs win the World Series? Although, a lot of people tend to just gravitate towards that.
Yeah.
And then maybe, place some prediction market bets around it.
But, wow, yeah. It is very inspiring how these technologies are shaping our lives today, and I think we are at a cusp of that could go either way, but it's going to be very interesting to see how time plays out. But thank you so much for joining us on this panel. I think we will now move to question and answer, and we'll have two staffers hand out mics. Yeah, that gentleman there. Yep.
Well, thank you all so much for a great panel, a great discussion. I was greatly inspired and informed by what you all said. I want to share a remark that I've heard in the past, which is that wealthy people in the past used to own racehorses, and now they build rocket ships. And so that reflects a worldview that is a bit skeptical of the potential for space exploration in solving what Alec mentioned, the terrestrial problems that we face. So I might ask, to somebody who is more skeptical of the promise of space exploration, what are the solutions that advancing in outer space can provide? What material benefit can be derived from further exploring and perhaps industrializing and developing our presence in outer space?
Maybe I can answer that as the person who's least far along in my career. I've
AKA way younger than me.
I've had the privilege of spending time with some people who are titans of industry in whatever field they're in. This generation of entrepreneur founders, folks like the two gentlemen to my right and left, they were able to do what they did because of courage, because of agency, and a sense that they wanted to go do something hard. And I don't think that stops when you've hit a certain amount of money. And so the drive to go create new rockets, for Eric Schmidt, my old boss, to go run relativity space, or for Jeff Bezos to go create what could be the greatest physical AI startup on the planet with Prometheus. These are people who are drawn to mission and hard problems. And the hardest problems we face right now are ones like, how do you put a base on the moon? Or how do you get rocket launch down to the point where we can now send a colony over to Mars? And I think you do it because you're expanding the realm of human agency and human knowledge. And that is way more exciting than owning a sports team or going and owning some piece of art. And so for those people who've now broken so many barriers to go achieve what they've done, they're looking at the next frontier and saying, I want to go do that too. And I think it's incredibly inspiring. I think the amount of information we get, even when you fail to send something to the moon, is immense, and everybody learns from it. And so I think it's incredibly inspiring that all of these very wealthy folks are doing what they can to push the frontiers of human knowledge. And I would say for you in this room, it's incredibly relevant. I wish I had known when I was 18 that you could just go start a company, and that today there's more capital in the history of the world that's willing to fund you to go do it, so that you can try and experiment and learn and benefit everybody in the process through your experiments. And I hope we continue to see people taking more and more moonshots, literally and figuratively. There's just so much need for it.
I would just add. Oh, sorry. Well,
yeah, that gentleman in the beautiful green shirt.
Hello, guys. Thank you so much for all of your takes today. They've been really interesting. I was hoping if the panel could give us a few comments about the AI surveillance state.
The surveillance state.
The state of surveillance.
Sorry.
When the government,
Don?
Yeah, I mean, these are very powerful tools. And I think we have to assume that governments are going to use them to, to look for bad guys, and sometimes governments will use them to look for or disadvantage their political enemies, and that's super unfortunate. And of course, there are some guardrails in place around that. I mean, back on the crypto side, it's one of the reasons that Congress has decided that there is not going to be a central bank digital currency, because we're super concerned that I think we rightly don't trust our government to, not look at how, kind of without a court order to look and see how people are spending their money and kind of inappropriately, control them. If it's kind of, they don't like politically what the person's doing. So it's a powerful technology. It's going to be used for good and bad, and just assume that everything you write on your phone is monitored.
Wow, but sorry to jump in here, but do you think that given this monitoring and given all the good things that can happen, the government should have access to these technologies?
I mean, it's kind of a silly question, right? Okay. I mean, everybody is going to have access to these technologies. The government's going to have access to the best ones, and it just is the way it is.
I would just one retort, just an obvious one, but there was a psychological tool developed about 20 years ago, give or take, social media, and I would guess if I had a series of questions that I could ask about who is using it, who's allowing it to upload videos, photographs, I would imagine that almost everybody in this room is allowing surveillance of incredible depth for the benefit of either social connection or some convenience. I'm not suggesting it's good. I think there's a lot of ways in social media it has been bad. But I would imagine that if people are worried about AI and surveillance, I would say a little metacognition and looking deep inside yourself and saying, how are you using things today? And are you switched off? Are you not involved in any social media? As I think that there's always public good, there's individual good, and there's a price for it. You can make choices to a large extent yourselves. I think that this is back to government plays a role for sure. I agree with Don that a lot of these things are going to wind up being used by a lot of the masses. And so There are negative externalities that have to be thought through, but I would just say I would guess for a lot of people we're already there before AI.
I mean, how many people here use Venmo? And how many of you have turned off your public setting on Venmo? I mean, like, okay, so like half of you are using Venmo, but are broadcasting to the world every time you use Venmo who you're giving money to. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
And one more small point on this. You go back 50, 60 years ago, it took the resources of a nation state to destroy another nation state. Today, an individual has that power. And in that world, the government needs to be able to do what it can to protect the American people. And we want that done through under law. We want it to be done lawfully and with restrictions and checks and balances. But in that world, we want a strong government because a strong government can preserve our freedom. So I don't think those are necessarily in contrast, the need for a government surveillance state and the need for human freedom.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, I mean, this question of, should we slow down the United States government from having access to AI? I mean, this is a competition, right? China is racing ahead. They are doing everything they can to gain an edge. And I mean, we want the United States to win that competition.
Yeah. We will take one last question from the lady at the back, please.
First, thank you so much for three founders of your useful insights. I really learned a lot. And I just have a general question on AI because currently a lot of investors think compared the current AI boom to the past tech bubbles. I'm wondering, how do you guys see in that view, and how much of the current fundamentals are backing up the valuations of AI in the market?
Yeah, and so I look at price to answer that question. And again, as I was saying before, the price, the hourly price of these GPUs are pretty much at all-time highs. I mean, H100s are more expensive per hour now than when they were first released, and that tells you pretty much everything you need to know. There is so much demand for inference using these tools that, and people are using them because they're useful. And that's being reflected in price. And I think we're just getting started. So there will certainly be plenty of AI companies that will fail, that will get outcompeted by other AI companies. But ultimately, it's very clear this technology is incredibly useful, and investment in the space as a portfolio is going to perform well.
Okay, I think.
Could I ask a follow-up question to both of them? Actually, you both have navigated the capital markets probably more effectively than most. I think one of the big changes between today's era and past eras is that private capital markets are doing a fair amount of the investment in this area. The public markets have, they've participated, but so much of it has been done through private capital, which is probably somewhat less susceptible to the wild swings up and down. So I'm curious if you see any impact of sort of the growing vibrancy of the private capital markets and how that can moderate bubbles over time.
I'll take a stab at that. And one last just retort to that question prior, which is a little related. I think technologies have S curves. I don't think this is a technology. I think it's a regime shift. Okay, that changes the equation, right? It's not about adoption of a tool. It's about adapting to what is the TAM of knowledge it's incredibly big. I mean, the TAM of information and knowledge is, there's 50, and we can go into the math of 50 trillion of knowledge work and what percent will it take, but it's a big TAM. There's some interesting, and I'll try to not go too deep because there's a lot to unpack in that, because I've invested in maybe 15 venture firms. I've done about 100 direct venture investments. I don't hold myself out as a pure venture capitalist, but you yourself are. I would say that the following. I would say that there's a perception both in private equity and venture, more so in private equity, that because things aren't priced that often, that there's less volatility. But it just prices less, right? And there's lots of differences in how people mark things. And there's nuances there that I won't go into, but the latest round in an investment is a pref that's above typically, unless it's pari passu with all the other ones. So are people subtly pricing those different because they have different left tails? No. So things aren't perfectly efficient in the private markets. But I would say a couple of things that do matter. First of all, the scale and size of the capital markets has changed drastically. And this is maybe the most important point I would get across. And that is that the nature of the private companies right now and the nature of this change and the technologies being pursued are so much more capital intensive than we ever saw. We didn't see $122 billion rounds going into companies. I mean, one of the reasons for people like Magnetar to get into venture and with CoreWeave is they needed billions of dollars. And so the rounds are just massive. That does tend toward concentration among some of the venture firms. But it does mean that there's just massive, massive investments. That does tend to crowd out some of the public market, right? I would say that I've been a proponent of easing some of the restrictions, allowing individuals to have access to some of the private companies. I think it's done to protect them, but I do think there'd be if they're going to stay private longer, there'd be a benefit to figuring something, adapting, if you will, to that system to allow people to have access to, and maybe with lessons on understanding financial literacy, on understanding illiquidity and otherwise, but I'd be a proponent of that. But I would say that there's a lot of change in the private markets, both the scale by virtue of what is being funded, and you're right to say that these things price every so often. But if there's been if you're talking about a bubble a little bit in the public markets, there's some pretty crazy valuation jumps that occur in the private markets based on sentiment like you would see in the public markets. That's not typical, right? But it's happening more. So I would say some public market feel the scale of what we're seeing, the sentiment, things that we would associate with public markets historically are working their way into the private markets. But
yeah, I think also you're seeing this crazy SPV phenomenon. I have to think there's at least $100 billion of fraudulent SpaceX SPVs floating around that people will, find out at the end of this year that maybe they don't actually own SpaceX shares. But this stuff, some of these SPVs in some of these companies are incredibly volatile, and then there's this complete opacity and layered SPVs and all sorts of crazy stuff. I don't know.
Could I ask one more question?
Please.
Okay. I'm sorry. This is just such a amazing opportunity. Okay. You've been thinking really hard about adaptability, both on the individual and the institutional level. If we're in a cognitive revolution, do we need to think about how America itself should adapt structures like the Constitution? And if we are to have innovation in the Constitution itself, which, by the way, used to happen all the time with amendments, what are some things that we should be thinking about now to prepare America for this cognitive revolution?
It's such a good question. And I'm going to start at the first rung, which I alluded to it earlier, but I'll just go into a little more depth so that I don't take up even more of people's Friday night. But I would say that and I know I have not read your book, I apologize, but I'm going to go buy it. But I'm gathering a little bit, don't judge a book by the cover, but based on the title. I do think that there's a lot to be said for just the conversation getting started. So I think if you take social media and the fracturing, right? Just let's go back for a second. I'm older. If you go back historically, there was a shared narrative. We had a paper, local papers. That's where you got your news. You had radio. You eventually had TV, Walter Cronkite. We all listened to the same story being told. And when social media came along, it fractured the message, right? It created, democratized, if you wanted to speak, it democratized what you could hear, but that fractured the message. Imagine a world where, so now the question is, how do you get coordination, right, as a country in that mode? You were asking me about how do you become adaptive as a country? Well, the first thing is there's got to be a way to communicate across differences, right? So with that fracture, let's pretend that all of a sudden at that exact moment where things are the most uncertain and we have the least amount of like coordination among us as a society, that an oracle comes along. We're fractured truth, but something comes along so eloquent, so easy to use, that you could just cede to it answers. That seems really attractive. And what if we allow that to happen? Now you don't have dialogue across differences. The things that actually, I mean, I think all of us would say, I know, what did we do at Citadel? What did we do at Magnetar? We created learning organizations. And one of the first things was debate. And the ability, if you see something you think we're doing wrong, raise your hand, like the Toyota Anden Cord, as an example of that, right? You want to say that, you want to sit and be able to talk and go, I think the following is not right, and you're going to revise a hypothesis, test it. All of that needs to happen. But that just think about what I just said. It requires a joint operating system. How you can have a joint operating system unless you have some shared structure of common language? I have a lot of friends personally. They're Democrats. They'll say, I won't even meet with that person. They're Republicans go, I won't meet with that person. We cannot, and the reality is, and we've learned this from data at the Litowitz Center and Northwestern, if you ask a person on this side, what do you think not what do you think of them, what do you think they think of you, and vice versa, they're this far apart. Then you go ask them questions actually about the other. They're this third part. It's not that they agree. They're just not nearly as far apart, and it's media and they're just not that far apart. If we can get over that hurdle, that is the first step. Get together and realize that as a country, we still have, it's the most amazing country in the world. We still have leftover narrative myths, which Constitution was a myth. It's this thing that is virtual, but it governs how we believe and what values we hold dear. I think going back and creating some version of that, a narration, a story, making people feel comfortable that, what do governments provide? Narrative. They provide skill and agency. They provide truth and trust. We need some of that in the form of a common language. Then we can go on, and there's a lot of hard work to do after that. And of course, my opinion is going to be that we need to have adaptability. But you're not going to get there unless probably you're crossing aisles and you're realizing we cannot be this fragmented and not if we're going to compete globally or just be successful as a species and get beyond this regime shift. There's tons of possibility on the other side, incredible possibility. But it starts with conversation, in my opinion.
Hard to follow up on that, but no. I mean, listen. I think that's 100% right. If we have this, we're in this environment where, half the country says, well, if Donald Trump says this, then I disagree, just automatically. Yep. Doesn't matter what it is, and that's an incredibly counterproductive place to start from. So. Hopefully we can move to a more to an environment where people can actually debate ideas in a more constructive way.
Debating ideas in a more constructive way. That is all for today, everyone. Thank you for coming here. And thank you to our panelists for joining us. It was a true privilege to join the three of you here. I've only heard about you from a lot of different people, and it meant a lot to me to be in this panel with you. All our attendees are requested to leave now. And
however, just a few closing statements. Again, thank you all for coming. Tomorrow's programming, if you are going to be joining us tomorrow again, it starts at 10 a.m. We'll start with Scott Atlas, Dr. Scott Atlas from the Hoover Institution giving a keynote, followed by our third panel on the origins and evolution of the American identity and how it's changed over time here at the 250th anniversary. And lastly, that will be followed by our fourth panel on the state of free market economics here in the 21st century here in America. We also will be closing the event out with a phenomenon, or what is definitely going to be a phenomenal fireside chat with conservative commentator and former vice journalist Tim Pool. So if you have any friends and you enjoyed what you saw here today, please bring them along if they may be interested. Lastly, for some just logistical things, for students, we do have a number of discounted tickets still left for the gala that we'll be hosting tomorrow from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. A number of our speakers here at the summit will be in attendance. So please check out our Eventbrite if you're interested in those. And I would also like to mention that if you're at all interested in donating to the Chicago Thinker and supporting our mission, you can do so on our website at thechicagothinker.com/donate. We are a 501c3, so your donations may be tax deductible. Thank you all so much. Hope to see you tomorrow.